For all of the items, for the cotton yarn portion of them, you'll want to go ahead and cast on, and I do recommend doing a crochet or chain cast on. You're going to start with a slip knot, and I prefer not to use a hook, a crochet hook, when I do this. I just like to use my fingers. I think it's faster and I think it's way easier. So you go ahead and take your tail and just make sure that it's kind of out of the way. Then you're going to wrap your loop, the back of your loop, around the first peg. And then you're going to pull the tail, or your working yarn, the tail's back here, pull your working yarn through that loop. In fact, we'll just anchor that down. Through that loop, and it makes a new loop. So you put that loop around the back of the next peg, and just pull your working yarn through that loop. It's just that easy, and you continue to do that to cast on. Last peg of your cast on, you're going to just go ahead and take that loop and put it over the peg and cinch it down. We're going to wrap our yarn around the back towards the front and knit it off. And now we're cast on and we're ready to begin the first row of the pattern. For these items, we'll be doing all of them in a garter stitch, which means one way we'll be doing in purl and the other direction we'll be doing in knit stitches. So to start this off, we're going to purl. So you begin with your second peg. And we're going to do one row of purl. Cotton yarn doesn't really have a lot of give to it. So you want to make sure that you kind of do this a bit loosely. There will be some shrinkage, especially if you wash it in the washing machine and dry it in the dryer, which is what I usually do. But if you want to keep the shrinkage down, you can go ahead and wash it by hand or wash it in the washing machine and then just air dry it. Lay it flat to dry. Now when you're doing the purl row, when you get to the final peg, what you want to do is go ahead and just knit that over like that. Then bringing the yarn around the back, we're going to slip this first peg on the next row. So that means basically we're just going to skip it. And we're going to knit back to the last peg. And if you really pull your stitch over and to the back, that will help keep your stitches loose so that they won't be too tight. And on the next round we slip the first peg, so we just bring our working yarn around the back and to the front of the peg we're going to work, and we purl in this direction. We're going to keep doing this row by row, back and forth, until we reach our desired length for the project that we're making. And all of those are listed in the pattern. So continue to knit your item, whatever you're making, until you get to the length that you want, and then you're going to bind off. And when you bind off, you're going to want to do a very loose bind off. And I like to bind off I'm just going to go ahead and show you quickly what the bind off looks like. Get to the end, knit and slip. When you bind off, you go ahead and knit the next one, pick it up, put it over the first one, and then knit over. And this, you want to also keep the stitches loose. You don't want to tug on them too much. You want to have a nice loose bind off. You don't want it to be super loosey-goosey, but you do not want to pull on that yarn or make it tight around the pegs. So you want it to just, the tension you want is just to have it kind of resting around the peg like that. You don't want it to be too loose, but definitely not too tight. It's better to err in the loose end of things rather than in the tight one when binding off with the cotton and with the tool. So you just do your standard bind off. Very simple. With that last one, I just go ahead and pull a long loop, and then you can cut it right off. When working with the tool, you want to treat it the same way as the cotton. You'll want to be a little bit more careful with it because it does tend to become really difficult to work with if you make a hard knot with it. It's really hard to get unknotted, and since it has all these holes, it's easy to get your hook stuck in them. So you'll just kind of want to be cautious as you work with it to make sure that you are aware of those two things. You'll definitely want to knit, cast on, bind off, all of those things loosely with this. So we're going to cast on exactly the same way that we did the tool, or we did the cotton yarn. Go ahead and make a slip knot. And again, like I said, if you pull this too tight, you're going to have issues. So I just make a really loose one to start with because you can always tighten that up when you're ready to. I'm going to anchor down the tail, and then just like before, put the loops around the back of the first peg. Bring through the working yarn and then pull it down. And this first one's going to be a little tricky because you have that tail that wants to be kind of a pain, but this is where you can tighten it up and then cinch down and then re-anchor. And that will kind of help to keep all of that out of the way and where it should be. So you want to just go ahead and cast on just like we did before. Again, not pulling tightly, just enough that it gets the yarn around it. You can see. Don't be intimidated to work with this. I found that I thought it was going to be really scratchy and uncomfortable, but it was really, actually really fun to work with. Go ahead and put that on to that peg. Bring it around the back to the front and knit over. And then you just go ahead and treat it like your yarn, and you do a row of purl, and you can see that I'm not pulling it super tight when I'm making these stitches. You can see how it's kind of loosely on there. If I were pulling it tight, it would start looking like that. And you can see how that's just really, that is far too tight. We want it to be just kissing, just hugging the pegs. So if you're a tight knitter like I tend to be, This will take a little bit of practice, but it's really relaxing and fun, and it actually is probably a good way to work on your tension for other yarns and projects. Okay, I'm going to show you how to connect the squishy add-on, scrubby part add-on to the squishy back scrubber panel. You can see that it's quite a bit longer. It's hard to get all of it into the frame. But what I want to do, I want to sew it onto the sides so I can either whip stitch the ends, or you can use any stitch that you like. I like to use just a crochet hook and crochet it on. You don't have to do that, it's just the method that I really like to use. So if you followed along with the first and last stitch, the way I do it, you get this nice V, like a cast off edge or bind off edge on every side of your item. So you'd have this along the top, along the bottom, and along the sides. And so it makes it really easy to sew on. You can use your tapestry needle, and you can find that edge on both of the pieces. These V's are a little bit looser, but you can kind of see where they are. You can go under the one V on one side, go under the V on the other side, and then that way you can easily match up the work to attach it together. So to attach this, at the top here, I am going to leave part of this open to make a little pocket to put soap inside, but I want to go ahead and start attaching it a couple of stitches into the work, just so that it has a little more of a secure fit. So I'm going to just push straight down in, and then I'm going to take my yarn and just make a loop and hook onto it and pull it up into the other side. Okay, and then I'm going to go down into the next space, and I'm going to pull up a loop just like that. And then the final space, and pull up a loop. And you can see how that's kind of attached it right there. This is my cast on edge, so it's going to be a lot more loose and stretchy, which will make attaching it down here a lot easier. So what I'm going to do is just find where I ended up, and I'm just going to make sure that I kind of follow this edge so that this pulls out, and I kind of make sure that I stay in that row. And I like to go ahead and hold the working yarn underneath, so I won't be seeing myself pick it up with the hook, but I'll just kind of feel as I go. So I'll get a couple of them started now, and holding it along this ridge of knitting. Just going to go into the next space here, push down in, and grab that working yarn and pulling it up. Like that. You don't want to get too tight on these stitches. And every once in a while as I go, I'll just kind of hold it out and make sure that I still have enough space to get over to the other end. Maybe tug this a little more. So I'm kind of holding it in place as I go. Now we're in the last stitch on the corner, so I'm going to go ahead and put it into the last stitch for the edge over here and pull that up through. You can see what that's looking like. Pull up a long loop so I can show you the front and back right now, so you can see kind of what it's looking like. So here's the front part, up here where we started and where we'll be leaving an open gap. Down this side and then across the bottom. So that's what it looks like on the tulle side, and on the cotton side, all of that stitching that we just did across the back is virtually invisible. Got a little bit of a bar here, but it kind of disappears. You don't really notice it too much. And then along the side, that's what it looks like. And then along the edge, you can see that this is like super squishy, super thick and squishy. Just really, really great. So we work at this edge exactly like we did this side, and we're going to work up until we get back to the top. And what we want to do is just like across the bottom, we want to make sure that we follow this row. So as you're going along the other side, make sure that you don't get out of place, so that you have enough that when you get to the top, you'll be kind of in line with this top area here. And you'll just go in 3 stitches. So go ahead and continue working on attaching your tulle, and when we're done, I'll show you how to finish it off. Okay, and I'm back to the top. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in, go through this final corner, and then I'll be working a few stitches in so that it matches where we started. Okay, and that's 3 on each side. So to finish this off, what I'm going to do is snip off the tail end of the yarn I was using. I'm going to thread my needle. Actually, with cotton yarn, it's a little easier to just stick it through like this. I'm going to go over a stitch and then up through, go through that big loop there and cinch it down. and over to the side and back down. Then on the other side, I'm going to take this and just weave it in. When I get to the end, I'm just going to work my way back. And we are moving on to the handles. To make the handles, we'll simply be making some icord handles to attach to each end of the back scrubby. We're going to leave a very long tail that we can use to attach the icord on, and then I'm going to just make a slip knot, peg, and go around the last peg. Then I'm going to bring the yarn around the front like this and knit off each peg. Then I'll bring the yarn back around the front again and knit off each peg. Then bring the yarn around the front and knit off. I'll do this till my cord is about 8 inches long. You can make any length of handle that you like though. I'm using a 1/2 inch regular gauge loom to do the cord. Let's see if we can look inside if there's any bit of cord. Okay, so inside this is what it looks like, and it looks kind of funky and flat and funny. But just like with most knitting on the loom, if you give it a pull, you see that it suddenly turns into a cord. So just remember to measure it, and to get it to its final stage is you'll just want to go ahead and give it a tug to make sure that it's all the stitches are in place where they're supposed to be, and you've got a little tube. So continue knitting your cord. You'll make 2 handles that are about 8 inches long. This is what it looks like on this side, and this is what it looks like on the other side. So just like the other technique, it'll basically look like this. I'm going to just show you on this corner. You go in, pull up a loop, and then go through the 2 loops on your needle or on your hook. When you go into a corner doing this method, you'll just want to go into that space 3 times. Do it 3 times to turn a corner. Okay, and I started in the corner. I did 2 stitches in this corner, and then to finish it off, I'm just going to go ahead and do one last single crochet into that corner. Then I'm going to pull up a long tail, and then coming around from the side, you see that this is where the yarn is coming out of. So I want to just go over to the next V along the top where I started to connect those together. Then I'll go back down into this V here. You can see that I've created just a loop that blends in seamlessly. And I'm going to weave in my end on the cotton side. Since it's a cotton yarn, I think it'll blend in a little bit better. And so there's our sponge. So one side we have this cotton yarn, and on the other side we have this squishy tulle for a bit of a rougher surface. This is a really great sponge for the kitchen. I absolutely love it. It's super squishy. You can see how thick it is, and it's really great. It takes your dishcloth to another level. And obviously you can use any stitch you want to connect these together. This is just an easy favorite of mine. It goes quick, and I think it gives a nice edge to your little scrubby.